There is a stretch of country in the northwest corner of Arkansas where the ridges refuse to match what the maps claim, and the roads carved through them back in the 1880s still follow their original paths, only narrower now, choked in places by growth that has no business spreading so fast. If you have ever found yourself in country like that, if you have ever stepped into a hollow at dusk and felt the air shift against your skin, then you already know the kind of place I am talking about tonight. Before I begin, drop a comment and tell me where you are listening from right now. Tell me what the weather is doing outside your window. It matters to me, and it matters more than you might realize for a story like this one. One more thing before we start. If the kind of tale I tell here is something you want more of, not just one, but 10, each told in full, in a voice made for the dark, there is a collection waiting. It's called What the Mountain Keeps, 10 files from 10 counties, 5 states, spanning 1893 to 1955. Every one of them walked up into ground that looked easy. Every one of them was signed off by the law with the wrong word. 10 hours to sit within the dark, start to finish. The link is in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. Now then, this one is called Something Followed This Family Through the Ozarks for 6 nights, until the Granny Witch. Newton County, Arkansas, 1907. Bedtoe Hollow, a husband, a wife, her brother, and a teamster they hired at the last crossroads before the wagon road gave out. 6 nights, 1 cabin. And a woman with red thread in her apron pocket, who knew what was standing at the edge of the yard, and knew the word for it, but would not speak that word aloud until she had no choice. Harperdonen ethe Familwy Hulbert, Yoakum was 34 years old that autumn. A timber cruiser out of Fort Smith. He had spent the better part of 12 years walking through country most men found reasons to avoid, marking trees for the companies and coming back down with a notebook full of numbers. He stood nearly 6 foot, 2, thin in the way a man gets when he's been eating from a saddlebag for weeks at a stretch. His hands were a wreck, split at the knuckles, calloused across the palms, one thumbnail black from where a mule had stepped on it 2 summers before. He had a low voice, and he was not a talker. His wife did most of the talking for both of them, and she had always done it, and he was grateful for it. Verly Yoakum, born a Craddock, was 30, one that fall. She carried herself like a woman 10 years older, which is what happens to certain women who grow up in a house full of men and learn early that if you do not steer the room will run you over. She wove on a floor loom in the winters and helped her mother-in-law tend women in labor in the springs. She had a plain, watchful face with a mouth that pulled to one side when she was thinking. She and Hulbert had been married 8 years and had stopped talking about what they did not have. Her brother, Ansel Craddock, was 28, a blacksmith at a small forge outside of Ozarks. He had come with them because their mother had made him promise, and because the inheritance they were going up into the hollow to see had been left to the 3 of them together, not to Hulbert alone. Ansel was a big man in the shoulders, small in the belly, with pale eyes and a habit of laughing at the wrong moment, which had gotten him into fights more than once. And then there was Otis Renfro. Keep your eye on Otis Renfro, because Otis Renfro is the one it took first. Otis was 52, a widower, and he drove teams for a living out of Jasper. They had hired him for the last stretch of the trip because the wagon road into Bedtoe Hollow was not a road anymore, in any sense the word normally means. They needed a man who knew mules the way most men know their own hands. He came recommended by the postmaster, and he came cheap. He was quiet, and he wore a wool hat even when the sun was full on him. His face was long, his eyes set close together, and he had a mustache the color of old iron. When he shook Halbert's hand at the crossroads outside of Ponca, Halbert said later that the palm was too cold for the day, and that he had put it out of his mind at the time, because a man's palm is his own business. The property they were going up to had belonged to Verley's great-uncle, Cletus Craddock, a man none of them had ever laid eyes on, who had died at 80. One that August of what the county coroner called failure of the heart. He had lived in Bedtoe Hollow alone since before the war. He had left in his will a cabin, 240 acres of hardwood and rock, one bald pasture, and a locked cedar chest at the foot of the bed, which the letter from the lawyer said the family was to open together. The lawyer had also written at the bottom of the last page, in a smaller hand, that the neighbors he had spoken to had asked him to pass along one particular piece of advice. Do not stay past a week. He had written it out that plainly. Not a warning, not a threat, just a piece of advice from people who had known Cletus Craddock. Halbert read it aloud at the kitchen table in Fort Smith the night before they left. Verley laughed a little. Ansel said the neighbors were probably worried about the roof. Halbert folded the letter and put it in his coat pocket and did not talk about it again. TPRTWOTHERE Vale, they came into the hollow on the afternoon of October 7th. The road down was the kind you'd drive with your foot on the brake all the way. The wagon leaning first one way, and then the other, the mules blowing hard on the switchbacks. Otis standing up in the box now, and then to see what was ahead. The cabin came into view around the last bend. It was smaller than Verley had pictured, and older, set back against the base of a limestone bluff that rose up behind it maybe 200 feet. All in one raw gray face, with a wet streak of moss running down the middle of it like something had spilled from the top years ago and never been cleaned up. There was one big walnut tree in the yard, and the yard was more moss than grass. The rest of the hollow ran off to the east in a long fold of timber, already going brown at the top. It was quiet. That was the first thing Verley said out loud when they got down from the wagon. It is quiet. And it was. There were no crows. No jays. No wind in the walnut tree. Halbert said later that he had noticed it too, and that he had made a note of it the way he made notes of everything, and then set it aside. They spent the rest of that day carrying things in. The cabin had 2 rooms, a front room with a stone hearth and a plank floor worn dark at the door, and a back room with a rope bed and the cedar chest at its foot. The chest was locked. The lawyer had sent the key with the letter on a bit of leather cord, and Verley had it around her neck. She said she wanted to wait until they had eaten and washed before they opened it. She said it in the tone she used when she had already decided a thing and neither man argued. Otis slept in the wagon that night, out under the walnut tree, wrapped in a horse blanket with the mules tied close and a small fire in a ring of rocks he had built himself without being asked. He said he preferred the open. He said it more than once. Halbert would remember that later. Part THRE, THE that first night was October 23rd. Cold for the season. The moon was 3 days short of full and rode up early. They ate cornbread and beans and drank coffee Verley made on the hearth. They sat for a while, without much to say. Ansel went out to check on Otis and came back saying Otis was already asleep, and the mules were quiet. Halbert read a little from the last newspaper they had brought, dated October 6th. 4 days old already. Verley unrolled a piece of weaving she had brought to work on, and did not work on. She sat with it across her lap and looked at the fire. She said later that she had felt something like a hand pass across the back of her neck once, gently, at about 9:15 that first evening. She had turned her head and seen nothing. Halbert had been looking straight at her when she turned, and had not seen anything either. But his face had gone still in a way she did not like. He did not remember that. He remembered other things. He remembered the breathing. At about 10:30, when Verley had gone to the back room, and Ansel had gone to lay down on a pallet by the fire, Halbert sat with the lamp low and the door barred, and he heard, out past the walnut tree, past the yard, out at the edge of the hollow where the timber started, something breathing. Not a horse, not a bear, not anything he had ever heard a name for in 12 years of walking timber. It was slow, slow the way a man breathes who is holding still on purpose so as not to be heard, and failing at the second half. In and out, in and out. Halbert stood up from the table, without meaning to, and stood there with his hand on the back of the chair, listening for what he later said was near enough 3 full minutes. Then it stopped. He waited another minute. He heard the mules shift under the tree. He heard Otis cough once in his sleep. He heard the fire in the hearth crack and settle. He went to bed. He did not tell Verley. He said later that he did not want her to lie awake, and that he had told himself it was a deer in rut, or a black bear passing through, or an old man's imagination on a first night in a strange house. He told himself all of that in bed with his eyes open for a long time before he went to sleep. Harper tfou art. Thec doi. The second day was warm and gray. They walked the property. Ansel said the timber was better than he had hoped. Halbert wrote in his notebook black walnut, white oak, shagbark hickory. He made a rough count of the acres in each and made his marks with a stub of pencil, wet on his tongue between numbers. Verley stayed at the cabin. She swept and washed the plank floor, with lye water boiled on the hearth, and beat the dust out of 2 horse blankets they had found in a wooden trunk in the front room. Otis fed and watered the mules, and then walked alone out to the edge of the timber on the east side of the yard. He stood there for a long time with his hat in his hand. Verley saw him from the window. She said he stood there with his lips moving, not praying, not the shape of any prayer she knew, just moving. When he came back in for the noon meal, she asked him if he was feeling all right. He said the water in the spring behind the cabin tasted like iron. That was all he said. That afternoon, Halbert found the first sign. It was on the far side of the walnut tree, on the ground in the moss. A patch of moss the size of a dinner plate had been pressed down cleanly into the shape of something. He crouched over it and called Ansel over. Ansel crouched over it too. It was not a boot print, not a hoof, not a bear paw. It was oval. It had 4 points at the front end, not 5. And it was pressed in evenly at all 4 points, which is not how a foot presses when it walks. A foot presses harder at the heel and lighter at the toes, or the other way around depending on the animal. This one was even. Halbert measured it against his hand. It was slightly longer than his hand and slightly wider. 1 single depression. No other. He walked in circles for 100 feet around it and found nothing else. Ansel said, standing up, that it had to be a fresh dig from a hog, that the shape was accidental, that the ground remembered wrong sometimes. Halbert did not answer. He went back into the cabin and got the axe from where it was hung by the door and set it against the wall by his side of the bed. He did not tell Verley about the print either. But that night he barred the door, and he set the axe in the corner, and he lay awake most of the night listening. He heard nothing that night. Not one breath, not one branch, not one owl. He heard, if anything, less than a night in Bedtoe Hollow should have. That was the thing he wrote about later, and underlined twice in his notebook. Not what he heard, but what he didn't. Chuintrativb Let me pause here. If any of you have ever spent a night in a place you weren't sure of, lying in bed listening for a sound that never came, and been more scared by the silence than you would have been by any noise? Drop it in the comments. Tell me where and tell me the year if you remember it. I promise you I read them all. Share perfie thirday. The third day was when things stopped feeling accidental. Verlie went to the spring behind the cabin in the morning to fill the bucket. When she came back, she was walking a little too fast. She set the bucket down harder than she meant to, and some of the water sloshed out onto the plank floor. She said, and I want you to hear how she said it. Calm, like a woman reading a receipt out loud, that there was a bundle on the spring stone. A bundle. She said it that way. Halbert went out with her. Ansel followed. They stood at the spring, a natural rock basin about the size of a laundry tub set into the base of the bluff, shaded by a leaning ironwood tree. On the flat stone at the near edge of the basin, where a person kneels to dip a bucket, someone had set a small bundle no bigger than an apple, tied up in what looked like a piece of blue and white ticking cloth. It was tied with 3 loops of a hair, a single long gray hair wound 3 times around and knotted. Halbert bent to look at it without touching it. He said later he could tell from a foot away that it did not smell right. It smelled the way a wet dog smells, and the way a jar of pickled onion smells, and something else underneath those that he could not name. Ansel reached to pick it up. Halbert said without turning, "Don't." Ansel did not. They left it where it was. They went back inside and sat around the table, and did not eat the breakfast Verlie had put on it. Otis came in from the yard and asked what was wrong. Verlie told him. Otis went out to the spring by himself and stood there for a while. When he came back he was pale. He said he had not touched it. He said whoever had left it had come and gone in the night without waking the mules. And the mules woke for anything. That was not a thing a person could easily do. Then he sat down at the table and he ate. He ate the cornbread and a plate of beans and drank a whole tin cup of coffee. None of them had ever seen him eat like that. He always ate small. Verlie said later that watching him eat that morning was the first moment she was really afraid. The fear that gets in low and stays. That afternoon Otis walked out to the edge of the timber, hat in hand, lips moving. Verlie watched him from the window and asked Halbert to bring him in. Halbert went out. He came up on Otis from behind quietly, in the way he had learned to come up on deer. And he heard before Otis heard him what Otis was saying under his breath. Otis was saying over and over, in the same tone, that he was sorry, that he had not meant to, that he did not know it would follow him this far. Halbert put his hand on Otis's shoulder. Otis jumped like a man who has been shot. He looked at Halbert, and for the first 2 seconds he did not know who Halbert was. Then he did. He came back into the cabin without saying another word. He ate again that night, more than he should have. He slept in the wagon again, and he refused, gently but firmly, to sleep inside. Harpar sextichhird ninijt. That was the 3rd night, October 25, 1907. This is the night Halbert put a mark in the margin of his notebook. A small cross, which he later told Nanny Beltree he did not remember drawing. On the 3rd night, the thing came into the yard. Ansel saw it. He was up because he could not sleep. He was standing at the front room window, with the shutter cracked an inch, looking out at the walnut tree and the wagon under it, and at Otis rolled up in his horse blanket, with his back to the cabin. The moon was full that night, or 1 night short of it. The yard was the pale color that moss goes under a full moon, which is almost white. Ansel said the tree threw a shadow across the yard the way a tree always does. And then a second shadow came into the yard. That was how he described it later to me when I sat with him in his kitchen in Ozarks in 1938. A second shadow. Not a body, not a shape, not an animal. A shadow. It came in from the east edge, from where the timber started. It walked. The way a shadow walks when the thing making it moves across the yard. And it stopped by the walnut tree. It stood there for what Ansel said was 2 minutes at least. He did not scream. He did not wake Halbert. He said he could not. His throat had closed up on him. His knees were not obeying him. The only thing he could do was stand at the shutter with his eye pressed to the crack. The shadow moved. It went around the walnut tree. It went to the wagon. It stopped beside the wagon on the side where Otis was sleeping. And it bent down slowly, in the way that a person bends down to look at a face on a pillow. Ansel saw the shadow of the bend. He did not see what bent. He said the moon was full on the yard, and there was nothing to cast the shadow. There was nothing there. And then the shadow straightened up. It went back the way it had come. It went across the yard and into the timber. The yard was one shadow again. The walnuts, and only the walnuts. Ansel stood at the window with his hand pressed against the plank wall to keep from falling. He woke Halbert in the morning and told him. Halbert listened. He did not interrupt. He asked at the end only 2 questions. Whether Ansel had been drinking, which Ansel had not, and whether Otis had woken up. He had not. Otis was at that moment out at the wagon brushing down the mules, humming a tune Halbert did not recognize under his breath. The humming was the first thing that morning that made Verley put down what she was holding and go still. Harpart se vin, thiguhbors. I have to stop here for a breath, because you have to understand what a place like Bedto Hollow was in 1907, and what it was not. It was not the frontier. Not by then. The war had been over for 42 years. There were telephones in Little Rock, streetcars, a governor's mansion with electric lights. But you could walk 15 miles up into a hollow in Newton County in that same year and be standing in a place where nobody had come through since the last man who lived there had died. The road you walked in on would be growing over behind you as you walked. That is where they were. The neighbors, such as they were, lived 4 miles up a different draw, over a ridge you could not get a wagon over. You had to walk it. Halbert and Ansel walked out to the neighbors on the 4th day. They left at first light, taking the axe and Halbert's rifle. They left Verley in the cabin with Otis, which Verley did not want, but agreed to because she said one of them needed to be with the wagon, and she was the one who could handle Otis if he needed handling. She did not say why she thought Otis might need handling. She said it in a plain voice. Halbert kissed the side of her head at the door and told her they would be back by nightfall. He was not back by nightfall, but he was back. The neighbors were the Fanchers. Old Mrs. Rowena Fancher, near 80 by then, and her son Emmett Fancher in his 50s, unmarried, sharing a small farm on the far side of the ridge with a milk cow, 20 chickens, and a good spring. Halbert did not have to explain who he was. Rowena Fancher opened the door, looked at him, and said without any surprise that they had come sooner than she thought. She took them inside, made coffee, sat them down at the table. Emmett stayed by the door with a shotgun broken open across his arm. Halbert would remember later that Emmett did not put the shotgun down the whole time they were in the house. Rowena Fancher told them, at that table on the 4th morning, what Beddo Hollow was, and what Cletus Craddock had done to it, and what had followed him for the last 40 years of his life, the same thing that had followed him into and out of the hollow every year since 1867, which he had kept in that hollow the way a farmer keeps a cow in a fenced pasture. Only he was not the farmer, and it was not a cow, and the fence, whatever it was, had come down when he died. She told them this in 1867. Cletus Craddock had been a young man, 21 that spring. He had walked out of the war, a year and a half late, and had come home to find his mother dead of the pox, and his younger sister gone to Texas, with a man neither of them approved of. He was alone, he was angry. He had inherited the hollow from his mother's people, and had gone up into it that spring with nothing but a rifle and a bag of seed corn. He had spent the summer alone. Rowena Fancher said her own mother had known Cletus Craddock in that summer, and had said he was a hard man, and he had gotten harder. That fall, at the end of the harvest, something had happened in the hollow. She said no one knew exactly what. The only thing they knew was that Cletus Craddock had walked down to the Fancher place one November morning in 1867 and asked to speak to her father. He had told her father that he had made a bargain. He had told her father the name of the thing he had made the bargain with. Her father had shut the door in his face and stood behind it with the bar drawn, telling his own family that Cletus Craddock was never to be let in the house again. He was not. For 40 years he was not, and in those 40 years, Rowena Fancher said plainly, looking Halbert in the face, 3 men went up into Beddoe Hollow at different times to see Cletus Craddock, on business, or to hunt, or to serve papers. Only 2 came out. The third was a tax collector in 1882. His horse came back without him. His hat was found the following spring at the top of the bluff behind Cletus Craddock's cabin. Nothing else of him was ever found. The county called it a fall. The county said the horse must have thrown him. But Rowena Fancher's father, who had been alive then, had said something else. Her father had said that whatever Cletus Craddock had bargained with was the one who ate. Cletus had provided. Rowena Fancher told them that when Cletus Craddock died, and she had heard he was dead the day after it happened, because word ran fast in the hollows, she had known immediately that the thing in Beddoe Hollow no longer had a keeper. She had told her son to keep the shotgun broken open by the door. She had told Emmett to keep the lantern lit on the porch at night. She had gone herself to see the Granny Witch and asked whether they were in danger. The Granny Witch had said no, not yet. The thing in Beddoe Hollow would not travel 4 miles for the Fanchers. It would stay in the hollow, and it would wait, and it would test whoever came into it, and take whoever was easiest to take. That was what the Granny Witch had said. That was in September, 6 weeks before Halbert and Verley and Ansel and Otis came down the road into the hollow with a wagon and a locked cedar chest. Halbert asked her the Granny Witch's name. She said it plainly, Nanny Beltry. She lived alone in a cabin on Peavine Ridge, about 6 miles north as the crow flew, but a good deal further as a man walked. She said if they had any sense at all, they would leave the hollow that day and come back for the chest with a wagon and a preacher in the spring. If they would not leave, they should go immediately to Peavine Ridge and put themselves under Nanny Beltry's roof, for 1 night at least, and do whatever she told them to do, pay whatever she asked, and not argue about any of it. Halbert asked her what would happen if they did not. Rowena Fancher looked at him for a while before she answered. She answered in 6 words, "One of you will be next." Halbert asked her who she thought would be next. She said, "The one who is already hearing it." He knew. He had known since Ansel's shadow story. He had known even before that, since the morning at the spring. He had known before that, in a place under his knowing, since the first night with the breathing in the timber. It was Otis. It had been Otis from the start. Apart EGHT for your TIGHT. The Halbert did not tell any of this to Rowena Fancher. He drank his coffee, thanked her. He and Ansel walked back over the ridge with the axe and the rifle, and they did not talk the whole way. They came into the yard at Beddoe Hollow just as the sun was going behind the bluff. Otis was sitting on the porch with a piece of harness in his lap, a needle and thread in his hand. He was mending. Well, even stitches in a light so low a man his age should not have been able to see. He was humming the same tune he had hummed that morning. Verley was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching him. She had been standing there, she said later, for near an hour without moving. That was the fourth night. The night they did not sleep. Have any of you ever stayed awake in a house you were about to leave, because you knew the thing you had come there for was worse than the trouble of turn around? But you did not turn around, because there was something you still had to do first. Leave it in the comments. Tell me if you did the thing, and tell me if you left. I would like to know. Kapart Ninin, THEFURTHNIGHT COTNUUD Halbert put Otis inside the cabin that night, not in the wagon. He would not take no for an answer, and Otis did not fight him, which was itself a bad sign. Halbert laid a pallet by the hearth and put Otis on it. He barred the door. He set the axe by the door. He set the rifle across his own knees at the table with the lamp low. Verley sat opposite him with her weaving in her lap, not working on it. Ansel sat on the floor with his back to the wall between the door and the window. None of them slept. Otis slept, the way a man sleeps who has taken laudanum. Deep on his back, hands folded on his stomach, mouth open a little, breath even and slow. At about 2 in the morning, by Halbert's pocket watch, Otis began to speak in his sleep. He did not speak English. He did not speak anything Halbert or Verley or Amsel had ever heard. He spoke for perhaps a minute and a half in a low voice, in a rhythm like a man reciting something he had learned by heart. Then he stopped. He lay still. He did not speak again the rest of the night. Outside, on the far side of the door, from about the time Otis started speaking to about the time he stopped, something walked slowly back and forth across the porch. Slow, deliberate, not a raccoon, not a possum, not the wind, steps. Verley, Ansel, and Halbert sat in that room and listened to the steps for a minute and a half without speaking, without moving. Then the steps went off the porch, around the corner of the cabin and away. They did not come back that night. At dawn, Halbert went out and looked at the porch. Nothing. No mark. No dust disturbed. No smell. The moss under the bottom step, however, was pressed in cleanly in one oval, 4 points at the front. No other, just the one. And the porch was 7 feet up from the ground. Party, fifefechi. Now I am going to pause the story here, because this is the point where the choice they had to make gets serious, and you need to be with me. A breath here before what comes next. If this is the kind of case you would want to sit within the dark, not just hear it once, but keep it. There is a collection I put together with the people at Forbidden Unresolved Stories. What the Mountain Keeps, 10 complete cases, 8 hours, 62 years of records nobody wanted to finish. Each one placed, dated, and signed off with a tidy word that never once fit what happened. The link is in the description below, and at the top of the comments. Go pin it. Save it for a night like tonight. Let us go back to it. Harparti even th 50 we tnud. The 5th day was a running day. They did not sleep, and they moved fast. Verley packed food for 1 day, wrapped in oiled cloth. She filled 2 canteens from the spring after standing at the edge of it for a long minute, looking at the flat stone, which was clean now, the bundle gone, taken by something or by no one. She could not tell. Halbert and Ansel hitched the mules to the wagon. Otis, when they told him what they meant to do, said he would stay with the cabin. He said it flatly. The mules did not need him for a walk. He had things to mend. Halbert told him plainly that they were not leaving him. He said it in a voice Verley had never heard him use with a man before. Otis looked at him for a long time. Then Otis nodded once. He climbed into the wagon, sat on the bench, put his hands on his knees, and did not speak the whole drive out. The drive to Peavine Ridge was 6 miles as the crow flies, and near 16, the way the wagon had to go. Up out of Beddoe Hollow, along the crest of the ridge road, passable that time of year for a small wagon if the driver was careful. Halbert drove. Ansel walked ahead with the rifle to watch the ruts. Verley sat in the box beside Halbert and held the reins loose across her knees when he needed both hands for the brake. Otis sat in the back on the pile of blankets, looking at the timber going by. He did not blink for what Verley later said was nearly the whole first hour. They arrived at Nanny Beltry's cabin at about 2 in the afternoon. They did not have to knock. She was standing in the yard. She was not what any of them had pictured. Small, 5 foot even, if that. Thin the way a fence post is thin. White hair braided in a single braid over one shoulder down to her hip. She wore a long gray dress with a white apron over it, and the apron had 2 large pockets. In the right pocket she was carrying visibly a bundle of red thread wound around a wooden bobbin. She had blue eyes, pale and clear. She was, Verley said, the oldest-looking human being any of them had ever seen, and at the same time she moved without hesitation like a woman half her age. She was somewhere past 70 and short of 90, and she did not tell anyone in her life which. She looked at the wagon coming down the last bit of the ridge road toward her cabin. She did not smile. She did not wave. She stood with her hands folded in front of her apron. When the wagon stopped, she said in a small, clear voice that they were 3 hours later than she had thought they would be. Then she looked at Otis in the back of the wagon and said in the same voice, exactly the same, that he would sleep in the shed. Not in the cabin. In the shed. She said it as if the matter had been settled somewhere else already, and she was only telling them. Halbert would tell me 31 years later, in Fort Smith, in a boarding house room with a window that would not close all the way, and a landlady he could hear on the stairs, that the thing he remembered most about Nanny Beltry was the way she did not act surprised. He said in his notebook that she looked at Otis the way a woman looks at a piece of laundry she has been expecting for a week. That was how he wrote it. Verley remembered other things. Verley remembered that Nanny Beltry walked up to her and took her hand without introducing herself, without asking her name. She turned Verley's hand over and looked at the palm. She said in that same small voice that Verley's grandmother had been a Cisco out of Van Buren County, and Verley's grandmother had known Nanny Beltry's mother. Nanny Beltry was sorry it had taken the death of a Craddock to bring them under the same roof. Verley had never told Nanny Beltry any of that. Nanny Beltry had never seen Verley's grandmother in her life, and Verley's grandmother had in fact been a Cisco out of Van Buren County. Verley did not say anything back. She just nodded. She said later that she felt standing there on the packed dirt of Nanny Beltry's yard the first real quiet she had felt in 5 days. Her party WWELVE, NYBLTRE. Nanny Beltry took them inside, all except Otis. Otis, without argument, walked to the shed, a small unpainted structure at the edge of the yard. He went inside, shut the door behind him, and did not come out until she called him out. In the cabin, she sat them down at a table that had been scrubbed with sand and river water. So many times it was almost white. She gave them a pot of something to drink that Verley said was sassafras and mullein, and something else she could not name. She asked them to tell her, without leaving anything out, everything that had happened since they came into Beddoe Hollow. Halbert said he was not a talker, but he told her all of it in order from the wagon hire at Ponca to the print on the porch that morning. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he was done, she poured him another cup poured herself one, and said what she said next in a way I want you to hear. She said the thing in Beddoe Hollow was old. It was not a haint, and it was not a devil in the way people use those words. It did not have a proper name, and if it had one, she did not know it, and would not say it if she did. It had been in that hollow likely since before people were. She said Cletus Craddock had gone up into that hollow in the summer of 1867, with a rifle and a bag of seed corn, and a grief he could not carry. He had made up there, in ways she said she would not describe at her table, an offer. The offer had been taken. The offer was very simple. Cletus Craddock had offered the hollow, and everything that came into the hollow that he did not name as his. In return, he had asked to be left alone, to live long, and to know when men were lying to him. The thing had honored the offer. Cletus Craddock had lived to 81 and died in his bed of an old man's heart. In all his 40 years in that hollow, he had never once been lied to and not known it. 3 men had gone up in those 40 years, and one had not come out, the tax collector in 1882. Cletus Craddock had named the tax collector to the hollow. He had done the same over the years with 3 deer, with a hog that had come down from a neighbor's farm, and once with a preacher who had come up the road to argue with him, and had turned around at the top of the switchbacks with a look on his face that had never quite left him. The hollow had been fed enough over the years that it had learned to wait for its meals, to take small ones between times, to be patient. She said Otis Renfro had been in Beddoe Hollow before. She said this without asking. Otis Renfro had come into that hollow one night in 1889 when he was 34 years old. He had come in for a reason he had not told any of them. And he had come out again, and he had spent the 18 years since then trying not to go back. The thing in the hollow had remembered him the way it remembered a debt. She said, finally, and I want you to hear this in her own words, that a bought-back debt is heavier than the first debt. Otis Renfro had bought his life back once, and the thing had let him. Now the thing had come to collect on the interest. Halbert asked her what they could do. He asked it plainly. She looked at him and said they could do one thing. It would work or it would not, and they would know by the 6th morning. She would go with them back into Beddoe Hollow that same afternoon. She would take what she needed. She would sit up the 6th night with them in the cabin and do what she called, in her own words, the standing off. If they did the standing off right, the thing in the hollow would remember its offer and would take what had been offered in the beginning, which was Cletus Craddock's, and would let go of what had not been offered, which was them. She said she was not making any promises. Only Cletus Craddock could make promises about that hollow, and Cletus Craddock was in the ground. She was going to try. Verley asked her, in a small voice, why she was going to try for people she had never met before that day. Nanny Beltry looked at Verley and said with the faintest smile any of them had seen on her that Verley's grandmother had once, in 1864, hidden Nanny Beltry's mother in a spring house for 2 days, when men in blue coats had been looking for her. Nanny Beltry did not forget a spring house. Her par T and T6TH9GHT, they drove back into the hollow before sundown, all 5 of them in the wagon. Nanny Beltry brought a small carpet bag, a bundle of cloth wrapped in oilskin, and a live rooster in a wooden cage. She did not tell them what any of it was for. When they came into the yard at the cabin, she got down from the wagon first, without help. She walked slowly, once around the whole cabin, once around the walnut tree, once around the spring. She stopped, at the edge of the yard, where the timber started on the east side, and stood there with her hands folded in front of her apron for a long minute. Verley said later she could not tell whether Nanny Beltry was listening or being listened to. When Nanny Beltry came back to the porch, she said without preamble that they had, by her count, about 7 hours until it would come. She would need every one of them to do what she said, exactly when she said it, and to say nothing to it, not one word. When it came, she set the rooster's cage on the porch. She took out of her bag a handful of black iron nails, old-looking, hand-forged, the size of a man's little finger. She gave 3 to Ansel and 3 to Halbert. She told them to walk the perimeter of the yard, one going right and one going left, and to press 1 nail into the ground, point down all the way to the head. At each of the 3 points she named, the top of the walnut tree's shadow, at the moment they had arrived, the mouth of the spring path, and the base of a small rock at the east edge of the yard. She showed them the rock. She had chosen it because it had been chosen once before by Cletus Craddock on the summer. He made his offer, and she had seen it in her mind that morning. Halbert and Ansel did what she said. They pressed the nails in until their palms were black. She took out of her bag a length of red thread, the same red thread from her apron pocket, and gave it to Verley. She showed her how to wind it in a figure, 8 around the door handle and the door frame 3 times, and to tie it off with a knot. She showed her. Verley did it. Nanny Beltry watched her hands. She took out of her bag a small paper packet of coarse salt and went around the inside of the cabin. Along the base of every wall, she laid down a line of salt as thin as a pencil line all the way around the room, unbroken. Where the line had to cross the threshold of the back room, she made it thicker. Where it had to pass under the barred door, she used a little more. She did it without speaking. She took out of her bag last a small mirror wrapped in black cloth and set it face down on the table. She told them not to touch it, not to unwrap it, and not to look at it under any conditions before she said. The last thing she needed had to be done just before dark, and it had to be done by her alone, and by Otis. She called Otis in from the shed. He came without being told twice. He looked worse than he had that morning, his face the color of the inside of a potato. He sat down on the bench she pointed at, put his hands on the table, and waited. Nanny Beltry sat down opposite him. She said without preamble, in the same small, clear voice, that she needed to know one thing, and he was to answer her truly. She asked him what he had done in Beddoe Hollow in the fall of 1889. Otis looked at the table. He did not answer for a long time, and then he did answer. I am going to tell you what he said, because it matters, and because Verley wrote it down that night in a small book she carried, and because 31 years later she read the book back to me in the same room where Halbert was going to die a week after in that boarding house in Fort Smith, and because I owe it to her to say it here as she said it there. Otis Renfro said, in 1907 at that table in Beddoe Hollow, that in the fall of 1889 he had been working for a man who owed a man in Jasper a great deal of money. That man had sent him up into Beddoe Hollow to talk to Cletus Craddock, because Cletus Craddock, they had heard, would sometimes take on debts that were not his and settle them in his own way. He said he had ridden up into the hollow on a mule and come to the cabin at sundown. He had spoken with Cletus Craddock at the door. Cletus Craddock had listened to him and said at the end that he would settle the debt. But not for money. He named a thing he wanted done in return, at a certain place in Jasper, to a certain man, on a certain night in November. Otis Renfro had said he would do it. He had shaken on it. He had ridden out of the hollow that same evening. When he got home to Jasper, he had not done what he said he would do. He had gotten scared. He had backed out. He had spent the 18 years since then, he said, waiting for something to come down out of the hollow and find him. It never had, because Cletus Craddock had been alive, and Cletus Craddock had held it. But Cletus Craddock was dead now. Cletus Craddock had held it a long time. The thing had remembered. The thing had a good memory. Otis Renfro had known. When the postmaster in Ponca had asked him to drive a family up into Beddoe Hollow, exactly what he was walking back into. And he had gone anyway. He said he had gone anyway, because he was 52 years old and tired. And because he had wanted to know what waiting for a debt for 18 years felt like when the debt finally came. That was what he said. That was the sentence he ended on. Nanny Beltry heard him out. Then she reached across the table and put her hand on his hand. She said, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, that he had done a brave thing to say that out loud. She was going to try to keep him alive tonight. If she could not, she would at least see him buried right. Either of those, at this point in a man's life, was more than most men got. Then it was full dark. Then she started the standing off. R-U-R-T-N? T-H-E-Stand-D-M-G-O-F-F-E. She stood the four of them along the walls of the front room. She put Halbert on the north wall with the axe in his hand. She put Ansel on the south wall with the rifle and told him not to fire it, no matter what he saw, unless she said. She put Verley by the barred door with the red thread and told her not to touch the door, no matter what came against it. She put Otis in a chair in the middle of the room, facing the door. She stood herself behind him with her hands on his shoulders. She did not move from that spot for the next 4 hours. The lamp was low. The salt line was unbroken. The rooster was quiet in his cage on the porch. They waited. It came at about 1:15 midnight. They did not hear it come. They felt the room drop cold first, in the way a room drops when a door somewhere else in the house has been opened. Verley's breath fogged. Halbert's did. Otis's did not. Otis was breathing shallow and even, staring at the door. Lips moving in the same way they had moved that first afternoon at the tree line. Nanny Beltry's hands were pressed down on his shoulders so firmly her knuckles were white. Then there was a step on the porch. One step. Slow. Another. A pause. Then the rooster in the cage on the porch went all at once silent. Not startled. Not flapping. Just silent. The way a candle goes out. And then the door pressed. Not knocked, pressed. The whole barred door bulged inward, gently, evenly from the middle, the way a bedsheet bulges when a hand pushes it from behind. The red thread on the handle held. The salt line at the bottom of the door held. The door creaked once, softly. Otis in the chair opened his mouth. Something in Otis said a word, in the same language he had spoken in his sleep the night before. Nanny Beltry bent down close to his ear and said in English, in that same clear small voice, that he was not going to answer. She said it again. Otis Renfro is not going to answer you. She said it 3 times. On the 3rd time, she named the thing behind the door. I am not going to say the name she used, because Verley did not write it down and Halbert would not say it. Ansel, when I asked him in 1938, went white in the face and told me to ask him something else. I asked him something else. She named it. The pressure on the door stopped. The room was still for a count of perhaps 5. Then something on the porch stepped once backward and stopped. Stood. Did not move again for what Halbert timed on his pocket watch as 14 full minutes. Nobody in the room spoke. Nobody moved. Nanny Beltry's hand stayed on Otis Renfro's shoulders. Otis Renfro did not close his mouth all the way for those 14 minutes. He breathed through it. His eyes did not blink. At the end of the 14 minutes, Nanny Beltry said out loud in English, toward the door, only one sentence. Take back the thing that was offered you and let go of what was not. She said it once. She did not say it again. She waited. Then, on the porch in the outer dark. They heard something walk slowly off the porch and away across the yard, and into the timber to the east. In the same rhythm they had heard on the third night. Only this time, as it went, the walnut tree in the yard, which had been silent for 6 nights, made a sound. A single crack high up near the top, a branch snapping in a wind that was not blowing. Then nothing. The room in the cabin came slowly back up to temperature. Verley's breath stopped fogging. Halbert's did. The rooster in the cage on the porch made one small sound, a sort of cheep, and went back to sleep. Otis Renfro closed his mouth and blinked. He looked at Nanny Beltry behind him and said very quietly that he was tired. She said he could sleep. He slept sitting up in the chair with her hand still on his shoulders for the rest of the night. She did not move. None of them moved. When the light started to come up gray through the shutter cracks around 6 in the morning, Nanny Beltry took her hands off Otis Renfro's shoulders and stepped back. She said, in a voice smaller than she had used all night, that she thought they were done. The 6th night was over. They would not be followed out. Hapert Feftian, The Marn Mgafter, they left that same morning, packed everything into the wagon in an hour. Nobody argued about the cedar chest. They took it unopened. It stayed unopened for 11 more years. When Verley finally opened it in 1918 in her own kitchen in Fort Smith, it held nothing but a set of neatly folded work shirts, a Bible with the flyleaf torn out, and a small tin box of buttons. Otis Renfro drove the mules out of Beddoe Hollow. He did not look back. Nanny Beltry sat beside him on the box with her carpet bag on her lap, and her hands folded on top of it. She got down at the top of the switchbacks, where the road split off to Peavine Ridge. She took the empty rooster cage with her. She said at the wagon that they were welcome under her roof any time, and they would not need to come. That was as good a benediction as a woman like her gave. They left Newton County that day. They did not go back. Halbert sold the 240 acres, sight unseen 4 years later, to a lumber company out of Little Rock for a price so low, Verley said, it was closer to a giveaway than a sale. Halbert said he did not care and would take less if it came to it, would burn the deed if the company folded. Verley let it go. Otis Renfro drove teams for another 11 years out of Jasper, out of Harrison, out of Fayetteville. He never went back into Newton County. He died in 1918 of the flu in a rented room in Springdale. Verley went to the funeral. Halbert did not go because he could not get away from work. Ansel went with Verley. Verley said later that in the coffin Otis looked younger than he had looked in Beddoe Hollow, which was the only good thing anyone could say about that hollow, and it was not very good. Nanny Beltry lived by county records until 1923. She died at what the paper called an unknown but great age in her cabin on Peavine Ridge, alone in the winter. She was found by a neighbor 2 days later. The neighbor said she was sitting up in her chair by the fire with her apron on and the red thread in her lap. And she was smiling. Halbert Yoakum outlived her by 15 years. He died in that boarding house in Fort Smith in 1938, the week after he read me all of this out of his notebook. Verley outlived him. Ansel outlived them both. Cheney Pilo Jew, it was Ansel who told me, in his kitchen in Ozarks in the summer of 1950, that none of the 3 of them, in all the years between, had ever been able to say exactly what they had been standing off in that room. Ansel said only that whatever it was, it had come to collect a debt. It had gone away without collecting it. It had, when it went, taken the interest instead, which was 1 branch off the top of a walnut tree that had not dropped a branch in 50 years. He said one more thing to me, and I am going to end on it because he ended on it, and because you can end an accounting like this one, but you cannot ever really close it. Ansel said that in the winter of 1922, the last winter Nanny Beltry was alive, he had gotten a letter from her, unsigned, in her handwriting. It had said only that she wanted him to know the yard at Beddoe Hollow was quiet again. The walnut tree had come down in a storm the previous spring. The cabin had gone with it. The timber company had cleared what was left. The road up into the hollow had grown over so completely that a man on foot could no longer find it. She had thought he might want to know. He said he had kept the letter in a Bible for 28 years. He had never showed it to Verley or to Halbert, and Halbert was dead by then anyway. He said he had brought the letter out for me because I had come a long way for the story, and I had asked politely, and Nanny Beltry had said 30 years earlier that she did not forget a spring house. And neither, he said, did he. Hesiloci and you, if you have listened this far, and if a story about 6 nights in a hollow in Newton County, Arkansas, in the fall of 1907 has put a small hand on the back of your own neck, drop it in the comments. Tell me where you were listening. Tell me the weather. Tell me, if you would, whether you have a Nanny Beltry in your own family. Generations back on a road that is not there anymore. If you know a similar story from your own hollow, your own ridge, your own coast, send it. It could become the next one. Stick around for that one when it comes. Until then,